So what is the difference in this investigation, around what happened and all other previous attempts in digging that have come forward over the years? The big difference is the basic knowledge in legal and witness psychology that has been used in the investigative work and applied to the material. The great genuine interest in criminal investigations in general, interest in human behavior and actions, and the underlying motives that exist for how we actually act in a certain context. And as with many genuine interests, engagement often comes automatically when one's knowledge can be applied in a very practical and effective way. And after about a year's research in available material, it became clear what had actually happened at the murder site and who were involved in the events. What randomly started with trying to give an innocently accused a post-death redress for what the thoroughly rotten establishment tried to do. Again. Then that it just went on to unravel the rest around underlying motives and who actually benefited, or perhaps did not lose, so much from Palm being executed and disappearing from world politics and conflicts. So with the right knowledge and methods to go through and evaluate witnesses' statements in different forms, it was not so difficult to map out what the most central witnesses had experienced and seen. With methods like statement validity analysis, SVA, which is such a tool that starts from the information in statements from witnesses and suspects, but also to some extent how the interrogations are conducted and designed. SVA is the most researched verbal truthfulness tool so far, and more than 50 studies have been published to investigate how this tool works. It is also the one often used in daily life, as SVA assessments are used as evidence in criminal courts in several European countries. Also tools and methods like content-based criteria analysis, CBCA, and reality monitoring, RM, were used to find completely decisive details that gave clues about who were involved, which unreasonable conflicts existed in contradictory statements from the same person, but also between persons. It is precisely in the borderland in the statements that revealing details have led further in the investigation. Much work around collecting statements has of course already been done by many other people in books and other documents that have come out. But it was about basic knowledge of how to proceed to analyze, evaluate, and investigate the content in the statements to be able to put the puzzle pieces in a comprehensive whole. With a great genuine interest in the research that has been done and with role models like Astrid Holgersen, Elizabeth Loftus, Per Anders Granhag, Aldert Fry, and many others, it was almost shockingly easy to dig up the circumstances and the revealing contradictions that developed the work. And where many others have let go of contradictions and relevant revealing deviant statements far too easily, it was precisely there that most substance was. Several of revealing contradictions that have been found and how they so progressing have led further in the investigative work we will get to. Even if covering forces from the establishment in MS media have done everything in their propaganda power to diminish the testimonies from people who happen to be in the center of events on the murder evening, which in itself is very revealing, it is the most central witnesses who have provided statements that have been necessary to sort out what reasonably happened on the murder evening around the Palm couple. And it is what is so fantastic that with the right knowledge, it was possible in just over a year's work to sort out what happened at the murder site and then bring all this to a whole in what has been behind the entire murder and the cover-up. Therefore, we will highlight specific witnesses and what statements it may be about that have been decisive to understand what happened. Especially since it is very rarely that these relevant statements are discussed in the usual Palm murder contexts because they are so revealing for what actually happened. First, we have the important witness taxi driver Delsborn, who at least in his first interrogation tells that he is sitting at the red light on Svevigen and looks to the left and sees a couple talking with a man outside De Karima. And what is so decisive from a witness psychological perspective is that Delsborn can describe in detail how the persons stand in relation to each other, and that he experiences that they are talking. The statements are thus anchored in descriptions that cannot be waved away and must thus be evaluated credible in a consistently reasonable course of events shortly before the shots are fired. It is namely when Delsborn gets green light and starts driving that the shots fall at the intersection. Then the absence of the same description of conversation between the man and the Palm couple in statements from Lisbeth Palm herself. So there is already here an obvious covering explanation that Lisbeth withholds for covering reasons. It should also be added that Delsborn, in statements to the first police on site, states that the person he saw talking with the Palm couple had a blue padded jacket. Second, we also have the fantastic witness Bjorkman, who had been at a party with work colleagues who is inside an ATM withdrawing money, while Bjorkman is looking for other following friends, who he thinks will come walking on Svevigen North. Bjorkman, however, gets tired of waiting and starts walking south on Svevigen, and then perceives also the company with 3 persons at the advertising pillar, and who he thinks seem to have fun. He then perceives the company walking in front of him, and that one of the 3 a few meters ahead puts the hand on the shoulder, and then fires shots at the man who collapses. Bjorkman was shocked and hid in an entrance to the Decisive store. In the first account to the police that Bjorkman gives, he tells about the person he saw together with the Palm couple as being as tall as him, and with a blue padded jacket. But the important thing is that Bjorkman in a later interrogation has realized that it may have been another person and that the one who fired the shots may have been standing waiting around the corner of the building. And it is precisely here that this course of events gets its very reasonable and anchored explanation when we turn to the last witness at the murder site, who actually saw parts of the course of events before anything has happened. It is the completely decisive witness Marelius, who is sitting in his car on the other side of the intersection and waiting for comrades to withdraw money from an ATM. Marelius is namely sitting in the car and sees what happens outside Decisive on front row, and sees how the waiting perpetrator stands outside the Decisive bevel for several minutes and waits for the Palm couple. Marelius has explained that he thought the man behaved so strangely and understood that something was going on. When he then sees the Palm couple come walking past the strange man, he steps out and cold-bloodedly executes the Prime Minister with 2 shots in quick succession. Marelius has stated that it was a cold slaughter by a cold killer who knew exactly what he was doing. He then disappeared calmly and smoothly from the scene. Even these statements that the professional killer fired both shots at Palm and none at the wife Lisbeth also speak against all the official truths we have heard over the years. Add to that statements from the witness Fawzi, who met the couple before the meeting on Svevigen, about a following person in blue padded jacket, who he then after the shot sees disappear into a nook in the building on Svevigen, so one understands that the man that Fawzi thought was too old to be bodyguard really is a person that the Palm couple knew and who they pleasantly talked with at the advertising pillar, before the waiting perpetrator took over a few meters later, at the intersection. So it is really this person in the blue padded jacket that the entire Palm fake investigation has tried to erase and memory hole over the years. The person who has been part of a theory, the so-called meeting scenario, which has long had an anchoring in many of the concrete testimonies from the murder site, but revealingly never has been confirmed by the widow Lisbeth. This person many have been hunting for over the years, and we can now finally explain exactly who it is. It is namely the person who solves the entire explanation to how the execution of the Prime Minister probably happened, and who is behind the murder. It can namely only be a small group in the world who can plan and execute what happens, of what actually plays out on the murder evening and at the murder site. And what establishes, and completely clarifies, who the person is that followed the Palm couple, up to a brief encounter of around 40 seconds at the advertising pillar, is namely the remarkable witness Wennerling, the artist, who saw a man as early as 9 o'clock outside the Grand Cinema, staring through the window to check if Palm was at the cinema. This careless person, who of course does not behave like a future perpetrator, was sketched by witness Wennerling days after the murder and sent to the Palm fake investigation. These sketches of a man in a blue quilted jacket, with unique facial features and details, leave nothing open to misinterpretation once you understand that the person the Palm couple briefly met outside Decisive, on their way home from the cinema, was none other than Olaf Palm's friend, Theophilos Souranakis, whom we will henceforth call Theo, mayor of the village of Machos, in Crete. What also strengthens this is that the closest witness Bjorkman, heard Lisbeth say something in a foreign language in connection with the shootings. And since Bjorkman already works at a high-tech company, it is easy to assume that it could not have been English. Therefore, it is reasonable that it is about Greek. Add to that embarrassing revealing information about a Greek man, who is taken in for questioning at the police station, and is put on the entrance report, even though he has not even seen anything of the murder, and you understand that this is fabricated information, which the fake investigation created to cover up for the abducted man, who after all was interrogated at the police station, later that night. It is thus once again this very Theo, Palm's friend Theo from Crete, who unlocks this entire investigation and actually explains both later statements from Homer, that the victim himself decided the murder scene, the Prime Minister was shot in an ambush, and that Palm should have been shot as a private person and not the Prime Minister, as a senior manager at Sapo was heard screaming apologetically of the Sapo employee's witness. When we then come to who the perpetrator would have been in his dark coat and without a head covering, as several witnesses have stated, there is also confirming information from witness Hage that he had a fit body and moved like a panther. Witness Hage has also, in recent years, described how the Palm couple and a person were standing facing each other before the shots, which contradicts Lisbeth's account of what happened at the crime scene. What is decisive, that at a point by the advertising pillar, there was a brief meeting between the Palm couple and the friend Theo from Crete, but that it was a deliberate condition for the waiting professional killer to stand completely calmly at the Dikarema corner, waiting for the couple to finish the meeting and then come walking by, so he could carry out the well-planned execution. What also provides evidence that it was indeed Olaf who wanted to pass Dikarema for the meeting with Theo, has been revealed by a nurse at Sabbatsberg Hospital, who heard Lisbeth recount that. The official explanation that it was Lisbeth who wanted to cross the street, to look into a clothing store, is thus just yet another explaining post-construction, as part of the cover-up. And when it comes to who the perpetrator would have been, it is once again just to take help from the same Sapo-employed witness who heard a Sapo chief excusingly shout that Palm died as a private person, who also saw the African professional killer Anthony White in Sapo's premises days after the murder. This important witness has thus provided two completely decisive statements, and in the description of how she did so much for several prominent persons to take hold of it, it unfortunately ended as usual with the witness more or less being threatened to stop bringing forward these statements, which has also been a revealing pattern around witnesses and the investigation in a parallel with the witness Katrin, outside the Grand Cinema, who saw a man act threateningly against Olaf Palm, and when the witness thought to intervene, Lisbeth gave a dismissive look, as if everything was in order. When the witness tried to bring forward these statements, she was first offered a plea to think of the widow, before the threats became tougher and more personal against her via her employer. Even Hage's companion, the witness Karen Johansson, has provided relevant and important information about how strange and revealing Lisbeth's behavior was in connection with the incident. How she tried to push away a life-saving Hage, and then ran out into the street waving her arms, as if she knew that there were many other people nearby who could provide Palm with better help than Hage could. Karen Johansson is also the important witness who definitely states that it took between 7 to 10 minutes before the police and ambulance arrived at the scene, and at that time Karen was occupied with nothing other than trying to calm Lisbeth in her strange behavior. To end important statements about what happened right after the shots and where the perpetrator went, we have the hero witness Jepsen, who at least thought he followed the perpetrator and dared up on the ridge, where he revealed strange police behaviors right after the shots, where he in a detailed account explains how he walked around and looked for a perpetrator for a good 6 minutes of the time, that the Palm fake investigation then tried to magic away, of the time it took to clean away the stay behind exercise and then go on the alarm as if they had been completely unaware of what had happened. And it is all these statements that become so embarrassingly revealing inconsistent in how it temporally never is possible to get times and contradictory statements from involved, with a real consistent course of events. We finally also have the witness Engström, who becomes part of the course of events when he happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and in his fleeing and confusion with the perpetrator, lies about when he came back to the murder site and what he was doing there. He understood early that he could be mistaken as involved, and therefore chose to lie his way through what he had been doing. For the covering Palm fake investigation, this suited very well to mislead everyone into believing that the perpetrator ran up the stairs to the ridge, and therefore the Palm fake investigation sought to cover up for Engström's all lies, but then had to adapt all the time to his new statements and utterances. Not so strange that Holmer called Engström the elephant in the china shop. This is a concrete and important list of central witnesses and what they contributed with decisive relevant statements, to be able to investigate the course of events. But in the very important witness psychological investigation, there are some details that need a more in-depth account, and that are completely clarifying that it was a direct cover-up of the murder already during the murder night. It is so important for all truth seekers to learn how one should look for the mistakes made in this investigation, to possibly reveal other covering events around the world.